So is this your first?
No, this is nothing. This is nothing to do with us. I think it could be shrunk.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay, where are you?
Well, we're going to talk first,
We're going to talk
and
first.
then we're going
Okay.
to play this one.
Okay, so let's go out of share screen. Oh gosh.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, there we go. And we're unmuted. So
Are we there?
should be. Where's the video? So I'll start video.
Okay. And does this work?
Working. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No.
Sit down. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So Giulia's going to. We can stand for it, but I think we need to be seen. You want to stand up? Stand up.
But you'll need to all
towards
be
the
at the
mic.
same kind of level to these.
Okay, come in, Giulia. Hi, everyone. Thank you for staying to the end in this sweltering heat. So this is a symposium, and I'm just going to very quickly read the abstract of the full symposium, and then I'm just going to hand over because actually I'm just the chair and you want to hear the presenters, which have got some fantastic things to say. But just to give you a quick overview in case you haven't read it already on the website, the symposium is called Traversing Boundaries, Prologues and Invisible Influences. And the abstract for the whole symposium is the very process of writing a thesis involves drawing a circle around a story. Where we choose to start our stories is exactly that, a choice. The endless and varying starting points of our stories draw circles around them and legitimize and textualize our narratives in different ways. They declare what is in and out of the circle, what is legitimate and valid to the arguments we want to make. In part, this is the inevitable effect of the linear process of writing or reading, but this is not how we live. We can tell multiple stories about our research, and where we start the story shapes the emphasis. With academia, these boundaries are often further policed by notions of what is and is not part of research. However, in recognition that boundaries don't hold, times, places, beings bleed through one another, RL 2014, we agree with Saint-Pierre that the past enters into the present of research, mixing unofficial data with official data. To this, it is difficult to say exactly where research interest begins and represent the multiple and varying traces that haunt our theses. In a move not only to acknowledge this, but in an attempt to celebrate it, we ask for the stories that have brought us to our research. This symposium aims to collect the stories unseen and unreported in our official research narratives, to highlight the importance of the holistic researcher and the tapestry of experiences that leave a trace on our knowing and research. So we've got 4 very different and great stories, I think. So I'm just going to shut up and let them carry on. So we're going to start with emerging diversions in a writing to come, when the past is ahead, with Giulia Carozzi.
Thanks, Lindsey. Can you hear me? I'll just come a bit closer, maybe. Before I start, I have brought this little object with me. I know due to COVID, maybe some of you will not want to engage with it, but for those who want, I'll just leave it here and you're welcome to take it in your hands because it's actually very much part of what I am going to read to you today. I hope you have not read my abstract because the abstract and this paper are quite far from each other. And the final 2 points before I start is that I'm going to talk very briefly about American Indians. And I am very much aware that it is a contested and contestable term. I've chosen this among many others because in the American Indian Quarterly, in an article, what do we want to be called? This term seemed to be the one that they prefer to be identified with. Finally, when I mention my PhD inquiry, I'm referring to what I'm trying to look at in my PhD, which is how the concept of cosmopolitanism can be revisited in an Deleuzian lens, making it an event of worlding, becoming world in the mundane. So the grumbling that you might find at the end of the paper is a very specific, it comes from a very specific location, which is more a house, School of Education and Sport at Edinburgh University. It does not want to be generalized or anything like that. It's just embracing the politics of location, really. And I'll start. Recently, one of my supervisors asked me in the gentlest way to think about how my thesis might look like, how things eventually might hold together in it. At the moment, I have fragments of stories, impressions, and fleeting presences which seem to refuse to do anything else other than being left on the edge of the urgency which prompted their emergence. I wouldn't call these writing personal diaries. They are more the mapping of an intensive way of reading and making micro-connection. Suddenly, a paragraph, a chapter, a sentence interact with other things, with what's outside the book, in unpredictable ways, which impel the writing to take place. These fragments seem scattered, disjointed, like the cracked soil of an Italian field in the middle of August, dried up and split by months of drought. But I trust the arrival of the rain. I trust the possibility of these fragments eventually holding on to each other, creating a consistent atmosphere, not in the sense of homogeneity, but as a holding together of disparate elements. I trust that the rain will run through the cracks, erratically merging the pieces of dry soil and building connection through mud, the end of my thesis to come. Reichmann, exploring the Deleuzian understanding of connection, writes, "To make connections, one need not knowledge, certainty, or even ontology, but rather a trust that something may come out, though one is not completely sure of what. But this pragmatism, this end, is not determined by given outcomes, not based in predictive expertise. On the contrary, his motto is not to predict, but to remain attentive to the unknown knocking at the door." However, my trust in the rain and in the assembling capacity of the mud is somehow haunted by this thesis to be a bounded piece of writing, a container which will necessarily leave the excessive outside. I experiment daily with the presences and diversions which I struggle to see appearing in my final work, but that nevertheless are around me, performing my inquiry and keeping me company. I give space to this cut-off excess, which will not enter in my final thesis through writing prologues and acknowledgements. Stewart says that writing is a method of attending and composing, and indeed, in these multiple acknowledgements and prologues, I attend the uneasiness of being the killer of the dead to be in my thesis to come. My acknowledgements become a graveyard, the prologues the white gravel paths leading to it. I denounce my own murdering ingratitude towards the immanent guides who appeared and haven't followed. I pay homage to all that which will not appear from that line after, but that could have been of my inquiry. I embrace the discomfort of having been unwelcoming to the unknown knocking at the door. But even the field of the acknowledgements and prologue is limited, and my graveyard remains necessarily incomplete. In the evening light or first thing in the morning, when the kitchen is suddenly or still quiet, these aside happen and they become the field. My thesis turns into a parenthesis. I write within, words flow as I wash the dishes and hear the metallic sound of the cutlery lodging in the drying rack. I let the door open to a past which suddenly knocks urgently in front of me, not from behind. There, at the conjuncture between the soapy dishes, the light over the sink, a quote which spills out of the book I'm reading, I speak with the ghosts, not to entertain or reconstruct some narrative of the way it was, but to respond, to be responsible, to take responsibility for that which we inherit from the past and from the future, for the entangled relationalities of inheritance that we are. Barat writes about ghosts. I prefer the term presences because in fact the kitchen hosts immanent encounters, perhaps shifty and unsteady, but palpable too. Often stuck within the bodies I remember them in, they on the one hand re-emerge prompted by new concepts and readings, and on the other they almost physically seem to enhance a worlding of otherwise abstract words. They become my guides, emerging from the past, but ahead of my inquiry, showing me the possibility that they seem to have mastered and I haven't yet, of thinking philosophy and literature in the world. In my prologues and acknowledgements, I admit my indebtedness to these presences, the immanent guides of my inquiry, and I take responsibility for my betrayal of them. I recount the instances in which they showed me the way when I was lost, and I moved past without taking them with me any further. I account for the times I've been unresponsive. As I write, they speak of new possibilities. Each time in their return, they turn in and towards something else. I never find them where we left each other the previous time. Their physical appearance is the same, but they show me something new. They are fleeting visitors whose faces I can't picture in their entirety. The by chance encounters that have stuck with me as impressions, assemblages, atmosphere that appear only occasionally. Events appear for a moment, and it's the moment that matters. It's the chance, we must say, is if you believe in the world, you precipitate events, however inconspicuous, that elude control. You engender new space-times. I don't remember Pablo's face, and I'm not even sure Pablo was his name, but his hands with hilly veins, his nails marked by strips of black, his long brown curly hair, his small stature are vivid images. I'm 8 years old in Florence for a few days with my mother. I'm wearing a necklace, a special one, the only one I wear. My sister has sent it from America, where she's now based. We have been exchanging letters for months. She has been feeding my long passion for American Indians by politely responding to my pressing questions about what they do, how they are, and has recently sent me the wooden necklace which she has bought from a visit to Fort Apache Reservation. No one has dared saying to me that he's unlikely to find American Indians freely or striding the pasture. I see my future with them, becoming one of them. Pablo is sitting on the floor of a square with a group of other street sellers. Holding my mom's hand, we look at the various wobbly and low table, pieces of cardboards and blankets hosting various handmade objects. I stop in front of Pablo's. My heart beats fast. He's selling small leather purses with American Indian patterns drawn on them and dream catchers. I plead my mother to stop and to admire the incredible collection, which instantly makes Pablo something other, the becoming of my desire of becoming. I ask if I can touch a small purse. He welcomes my request. I hold the purse in my hand and I carefully put it back. I still feel time expanding disproportionately as I decide to take off my necklace. The knot behind my neck is too tight. I need to give that special gift to him. Making the decision isn't difficult. Finding the courage to give it to him is. I finally hold the necklace in my hand and offer my gift. I'm not sure what I muttered, if I said anything at all, but the hands of Pablo are now holding the necklace, and he is gifting me the purse I had asked to touch a few minutes earlier. That reciprocal gesture solidifies within me. I feel a huge sense of fulfillment in having given Pablo my necklace, and I keep his purse in my pocket. I keep putting my hand inside it to check I haven't lost the precious gift. That evening at the dinner table with my cousins, uncle and aunt, I tell them in trepidation my amazing story. However, Pablo's generosity is met with suspicion. He's just going to sell it to the next person that stops in front of the stall. That necklace was so special to you, just go and get it back, my aunt suggests. But I don't, and I return to my small hometown with Pablo's purse and no necklace. A few days later, the phone rings. It's my aunt. She needs to talk to me urgently. You were right, she shouts at the phone. I've gone back to Pablo. He had your necklace on his stall. I asked if I could buy it. He looked at me and said, you can buy whatever of these objects, but not this necklace. It is a special gift, which I'm not selling. I listen. I put down the phone, but I'm not surprised. I thank Pablo, his hands, the necklace and the purse for the trust in this world, for having been part of an event which still speaks beyond its time and ahead of this time, about the entangled relationalities of inheritance that we are. I thank Pablo and the purse for making the words of the laws of this world tangible, happening now. I thank the knot, so difficult to disentangle, for having engendered new space-times which felt disproportionately unsustainable. I acknowledge Pablo's generosity in having caught the line of flight and closed it as a potentiality in the necklace I was giving him. Our exchange, however minimal, inconspicuous, eluded the control of what was predicted to happen. He will sell it. I apologize to him if I haven't gone further beyond his hands and the necklace, if I haven't turned the event into the body of my inquiry. I'm almost done. Pablo belongs to a time which in academic terms is too often considered unofficial, a time that predates my research. The same applies to his liminal presence, fleeting and amorphous, yet palpable as a physical trace. Pablo is a transversal, collective body which transcends the bounded extrinsic individual I know nothing about. The words of Manning, what is the pact that the university demands? What body does he need to survive? Feel like an invitation to re-encounter him in a present which began now over 25 years ago. Pablo is an assemblage of atmospheres, objects, and affective lines connected to body images that once were and that perhaps now are no more. In short, an impossibility for the ethics form I'm asked to engage with. Maybe dead, but equally alive, in the middle of my kitchen while sitting cross-legged on a square, Pablo, the necklace, and the purse are yet to be exhausted possibilities, the not yet of a past to come. But the academic time and the bodies living in it seems often to be conceived in a different way, in a linear and bounded manner, which makes it difficult to attend the affective urge coming from this world, from this kitchen, asking to engage with the unfinishedness of living and writing life as an inquiry. Before, now, and after are too often enclosed and locked within 3 or 4 years. At Moray House, we are expected to collect fresh data from a bounded field that produces at the right time, at the right moment, after the season of literature review and the establishment of a sound methodology, and before the season of data analysis. When we make use of a past which predates the research, we have to emphasize the auto at the expense of our bodying as transversal, collective, before they are individual, more than a we, which is unstable. And so the prologues and the acknowledgements become for me the fields in which I can suddenly follow the provocation of a courageous poppy whose excessive red is a blow in this cracked and dry field. My writing turns into the science of farewells and unitings. Writing becomes a way of attending and accounting for this roaming in the graveyard, which exceeds the field from within. This purse, physically between us, is the embodiment of how things, assemblages, and atmosphere exceeds themselves and ask us to work and rework them in the always unfinished attempt to exhaust their potentials.
It's so hard being chair because you're thinking, okay, I've got to start the next one. And we often need time, I think, after these kind of presentations to process them. But I need to give time equally to everyone on the panel. So I do need to push on. So I'm just going to do play. No, do I do share screen first? Share screen. And then play.
You need to click on share. Just go back to share screen.
I knew this. So we all sat here because we thought it would mean less interruptions of people getting up and down, but of course we've got the technological interruptions instead.
Okay, so that's sharing the screen now.
Okay, so then I press play here. So this is Carolyn Cook, who is from Open University, who is going to talk about 6 objects, which signify her PhD journey, and I'm going to let her talk for herself because I think that the video does that, if we can get it. It was there a minute ago. Well, we've got we could do Barbara's next, shall we? Or...
Why don't put Barbara's on now?
Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to come back to Carolyn in a minute. We're going to be a bit flexible and fluid here, and we're going to go to Barbara's next. So Barbara, I think you've seen on the screen. I think a lot of you know her. She's been on the screen and chatting for a bit before the symposium. Nice to meet you, Barbara. By the way, in person, well, virtually. Nice to see you. So we're going to go to your video next. Okay. And so Barbara's pre-recorded this, but of course she's going to be around for the discussion and reflections afterwards.
She was going to talk.
So here we go.
Hang on.
Oh. I knew this was going to happen.
I just, yeah, no.
Share screen. Yes, this one. Okay.
And then.
Should I turn this off as well?
Okay, there's no there's no sound. Hello, my name is Barbara Becnel. I'm at the end of my third year of a PhD program at the University of Edinburgh, and I want to thank Lindsey Horner and all the others who organized the symposium that's providing me an opportunity to share my ideas today. And as you can see from my title page, I have this new idea or concept that I'm presenting that's called the shadow autoethnographic experience. Okay. I'm going to talk about that in three ways. First, I'm going to share with you my doctoral student pre-story, which I'm going to argue has led into what is now a parallel shadow autoethnographic experience, which that has led to me needing to problematize my role as scholar to protect my scholarship. So let's start with the pre-story. So my doctoral student pre-story begins with me going into Watts, California to interview Crips and Bloods who were starting a gang truce after 21 years of fighting. And I was asked by a national women's magazine to write an article about it. And this was in my second career incarnation. Then at that point, I was a journalist. Prior to that, I had been an economist, senior economist, public policy analyst, and mathematician. But at any rate, I show up at Watts and to do these interviews, and I figure they're Black, I'm Black, shouldn't be any problem. I'll be able to relate to them. They'll be able to relate to me. And that was an erroneous assumption. I was so wrong. And the problem was me. As my middle class self arrived in Watts to interview them, my college educated middle class self, who wore pearl button type earrings, pearls, hair straightened. I looked nothing like I look now. And that person had a middle class bias and judgment before I even had interviewed them, before I knew who they were, before I had time to study their culture, to study them. Anyway, I assumed they were bad, they were wrong, and I was right. And so that I had to work on that judgment, and that all came to a head when I went to visit the co-founder of the Crips, who was a prisoner on San Quentin's death row. And he asked me to send him my resume. I did. And then after we had interviewed, I had interviewed him several times. He then said to me, he'd gotten the resume, he read the resume, it was really impressive. I had accomplished so much, but he had a question for me. What was the question? He said, "Why are you so afraid?" I was pretty stunned by that. And at first didn't know what he was talking about, but once I did understand, he was right. And what he was talking about was that that I, as this middle-class Black woman, had really sort of sacrificed myself as a Black person in order to be a successful middle-class person. And that was because I had been raised, my mother was a high school principal, and she had raised me that the only way to be successful in the United States as an African American is to be as white as you could be, to speak as white as you can speak, to dress, behave as white as you can dress and behave. And so there I was, but meanwhile, I thought I was pretty progressive and radical. And it turns out I wasn't. So that precipitated an identity crisis and nearly a year's worth of reflexivity to get to a point where I could not be so judgmental. Because at one point I just had to decide, do you really want to understand this culture? Do you want to be able to do this research, or do you want to stick with and hold on to your middle classness? I decided I really wanted to learn, and so I started working on my reflexivity and to change and to be able to get past my bias. Now, but the concept of shadow autoethnography, though, is that is several things. Number one, when the pre-story doesn't just stop, even though I'm calling it a pre-story, it doesn't stop at the moment that I decide that I'm going to do this research and get a PhD. It continues to progress, and what it did was it transformed itself into what I'm calling a shadow autoethnographic experience that was sort of paralleling the PhD work and the PhD story. And so then the question is, in what ways are the boundaries crossed? Well, the one I've already talked about is the movement of my projection of bias from my own middle class background onto the gangsters, onto my interpretation of what I saw of the gangsters. But it also bounced back the other way, because as I was doing my research and looking at 400 years of racism and tracking three conceptual strands, duality, agency, and freedom, and to see how those strands converted into a Black gangster class culture over these years, reading about the brutality and the cruelty that was imposed on what were my ancestors, since I'm African American, was really hard on me. So what the damage or the impact of, or the potency of how I could project into the research was also as potent in terms of how the research could project into me. And and that had impacts on my positionality. So I became one persona was the scholar, one persona was an activist. I became an activist as I learned more about how the world of Black gangsters and the criminal justice system in the United States. I became a criminal justice reform activist. And then thirdly, I became a surrogate gangster representing the epistemology of gangsters. So such that if I felt my scholar self and my activist self was in any way overwhelming or overcoming my the gangster epistemic perspective, I stepped into that persona to make sure that that work and that insight did not get lost. But then, of course, that led to me needing to problematize my role as scholar and to protect my scholarship. And one important way that I did that is I brought 3 incarcerated gang leaders, uh, currently incarcerated, into my work as co-researchers with 2 functions. One function was to be a validator so that I wasn't co-opting, so that they could look and read my chapters and see that I wasn't co-opting and or misrepresenting their culture, that my theorizing on what I saw and what I thought I understood was close to at least their truth and what they experienced. And then the other part, um, and their other role was reflexivity, so that they still paid attention to, Barbara, even though I had changed tremendously, my middle class self could still does have the ability to show up in ways and that I don't even know is coming. So I wanted that to still stay in check and to be monitored. So they provide those roles. So with that, I will end my presentation. I invite any of you to reach out to me via email, since I'm not there to answer questions, which I wish I was, but I'm not. So please, I hope to hear from any and or all of you soon. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And of course, Barbara is here.
Of course, I am here.
She is here. So we will be able to share and reflect together at the end of the full papers. And it's lovely to have you here, Barbara. So we've got a video by Carolyn, is it? Yeah, okay. So Carolyn Cook from Open University is going to share about her PhD journey and the traversing of the boundaries on that particular journey. I've included the sound this time.
I guess we'll have to download it again.
Oh, okay.
It was closed when it went to open it, I think.
Oh, it's here.
That's the one.
This is a story of a project working with music student teachers. The project explored the idea of teaching as an improvisatory act.
Well, sorry about that, Jesse. I've no idea what's happened with this and everyone, that you can't hear what's going on in the main room. I think we're sort of.
Is it the microphone?
I'm not sure what it is. We're actually really overrun with this session. I'm not quite sure why. And we have to leave the M shed at 6 o'clock. We're supposed to be finished 10 minutes ago. So I'm not quite sure what's gone on with this panel. But we've had a look at the programme and there are a couple of people who dropped out tomorrow. So maybe those who haven't presented, we can put those in tomorrow and we can sort out why everyone online can't hear what's going on.
Because this is turned off. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll have had that particular offering. The idea is that we have at least one person who's not going to present tomorrow. So I wondered if we could pick the rest of this. I'm really sorry to have to divide your panel up, but there were rules and reasons why we're going to build at 6 o'clock. And that sounds and feels horrible, but I hope we can carry your conversations out to tea or Carver or wherever our spiritual place is. Yes, I think we can take both of those in tomorrow.
And Kelly as well.
There is Kelly as well.
Yes, that's what I mean. Both this recording and this, and then Josh's podcast. Yeah.
So we'll have time to.
So we should have time to pick those in tomorrow.